All right, thanks very much. My name is Paul Litchfield. I work at GORUCK. Previously, I worked at Reebok. I actually started at Reebok quite by accident. I was unexpectedly coming out of a PhD program in science stuff, and I interviewed with a small company in the Boston area called Reebok. I was the sixth person in the R&D department. It was a really small company. They just launched this crazy shoe they made for women called the Freestyle for aerobics, and who makes shoes for women, right? It's dumb. So things started catching on. But Reebok was making a lot of track and field shoes. We're doing really well. And then also what was happening was there was the sneaker battles were beginning to happen. And what was also occurring was that the NBA basketball was evolving a lot. It started with Dr. J in the ABA when he started playing above the rim. And then in the mid-'80s, there were guys like Michael Jordan, there's Magic Johnson, there's even Larry Bird, and there was Dominique Wilkins, and a lot of Reebok athletes, because we had an emerging basketball business. But one of the things we needed to do is we needed to evolve the product to make it capable to withstand the rigors of these colossal athletes who were incredibly talented and moving in ways that were both unexpected and putting a lot of force on their bodies and their product, their gear and stuff. So I was tasked. I was set aside in this thing called the Advanced Concepts Group, which I thought was they wanted me out the door. They just didn't have the guts to tell me that. But so we were actually targeted to make some new product. And so we started looking at basketball shoes. We started looking at basketball players, and we started with straps. We did braces. We did all kinds of things. But in a previous life, I was a firefighter for a hot minute, and on the ambulance, we had air splints. We had masked trousers, masked pants, which are like for shock victims and trauma and things like that. And so air management was a way to go. So we started looking at the potential of having air management as like a cast system for the to fit. So people say like, oh, well, you invented the pump and stuff. It's like the Reebok one, yes, but at the same time, Reebok was big in tennis, and we had a partnership with this company called Alessi, and I met this wacky R&D guy up in Montebluna, Italy, which is not a hard day's travel, I'll tell you that. So, and he had this shoe that he made up, which was a high-top tennis shoe, which didn't work. But he also took a Reichly ski boot, and Reichly at the time was a big ski boot manufacturer, and they had a pump mechanism to fit on the tongue of your shoe. So that's actually from a Reichly ski boot. That's a brass fitting. That shoe weighed about, 2.5, 3 pounds. So it was kind of impossible. But so to the notion of like virgin territory and like, hey, we're going to do a pump, not really true. However, we started making this thing. I worked with a small outside design firm in Boston called Design Continuum. Me and two other guys, we just started working on this thing, and we made 2 shoes. First shoe, and I apologize, but these are the actual shoes I took photographs of 30 years later. Other than a guy like D. Brown, everything ages, me and the shoes, right? So the shoes are actually falling apart a little bit, but that's just how shoes goes. In the back there, in the yellow part, that's the pump. And the release mechanism, that little yellow dot there where it says dynamic support, that's actually a release mechanism that's similar like on your car tire or your bicycle tire. So then we made another shoe as well at the same time. That was an automatic pump, and I thought this was the coolest thing ever. And that's a little dial, it's a little dimmer switch. And in the inside the shoe, there was a little pump in the heel that when you walked, it inflated. I thought that was really cool. And this was not called the pump, by the way. These were just shoes. These were just prototypes. And what happened was, we ended up working with a bunch of high school and junior college players to test it. Everybody loved this shoe because they sat down and they pumped it up and released it, which was an unknown kind of event that we didn't expect, because we're looking at it from a performance standpoint. But the kids loved messing around with it. So we started doing it. And then at the same time, we went to this thing called the Atlanta Super Show, which was essentially, it was a sporting goods show, annual sporting goods show in Atlanta, Georgia, right around January, February. And it was essentially yesteryear's version of CES. Like, it was the place to be. There were and so we launched this, and we had a great little try-on booth. You had to get invited in. You tried it on. It worked really well. And at the same time, Nike had a shoe called the Air Pressure. It was under glass. It was all finished. It was pristine. And I knew the guys that were making it, this guy Bruce Kilgore and Tinker Hatfield. And I'm like, and they were swaggering around because it looked a lot better than these things. We came back from Reebok. Everyone's high-fiving themselves. And so Paul Fireman, the owner of Reebok, said, hey, we're going to launch this thing in Thanksgiving of '89. So about 9 months later, 10 months later. And so everybody's high-fiving each other and whatnot. And I raised my hand. I said, hey, Paul, we can't. And he's like, what? I said, we can't. Because we literally couldn't make those things. Sorry, guys. We couldn't make these from a manufacturing standpoint. Like, it took us hours to make these things in the shoemaking process. So I'm like, Paul, we can't do it. So Paul Fireman said, listen, if you expect to pick up a paycheck in December, you're landing these things at Thanksgiving of '89. And literally, it was like I had a contagious disease. People who were sitting around me were like all sliding away, like, uh-oh. And so for the next few months, it was kind of solo ride, but with a small group of people. Fast forward, the design team we was working with were fully invested in these two shoes. We couldn't make them, so I finally went to our head of design at Reebok. And I said, look, we have this guy, Paul Brown. I said, Paul, we have like 5 days. I said, I need this done by Monday. You need to redesign this thing. I said, you need to take this shoe, and I need that yellow pump somewhere on the tongue so I can manufacture it. You need to take that release valve and put it up somewhere. I said, just please do it. Monday morning, he shows up. I expected a bunch of hand sketches and whatnot. He had a sketch that looked like this. And honest to God, it's one of those things where it just hit me. I'm like, that's it. Like that, I didn't even review it with anybody. And he said, yeah, he goes, Litch, I put the pump on top, and he said, because it's a basketball, I made it look like a basketball shoe, and to balance out the design, I put it in the back, and I'm like, shit, that's it. Now, the truth is, I didn't know how to make it, because the pump ball doesn't look like a basketball shoe or anything, but we ended up working out all those details, and then we ended up with what we call the pump bladder. And the pump bladder consists of a bag that you would see for plasma or for blood bags, and it's got a latex ball on the top for pumping it up and all that. And all those dots are little quilt patterns to either create a uniform inflation or big zones to fit around your heel and your ankle and all that. And so we worked on that for a number of months. Everything worked out really well. The company we worked with happened to be in Massachusetts. There's a welding company. It's called Dielectrics, and they do a lot of high-end stuff. They did back in the day, still do. And so this bladder right here cost $17.98 to make. And so at the time, basketball shoes at a factory level cost about $15 or $16. So this was like insane. And so, but it was what we could make, what we did. So the shoe was going to be astronomically expensive. Dielectrics, because they had to do sizes, and this was out of their realm. They were like, okay, the only way this is going to work is if you guarantee 36,000 pairs in a 12-month window. And we literally had 0 orders, none. And so what happened was my buddy Chris Walsh, who was in VP of production, he said, hey, can you sign this contract with me? I go, like, yeah, sure. And I'm like, why do you want me to sign it? I'm a prototype guy. And he's like, because when I get fired, I want you to get fired too. So I'm like, all right. All right, that's cool. That's fine. So we did that. And so what we did with the pump bladder was set up this protocol where every pump bladder that was made at Dielectrics, we tested for 3 hours to make sure it worked. Then we shipped it over to Korea, Busan, Korea. And then on the incoming inspection, we had another 3-hour inspection. And then after they stitched the uppers of the shoe together, needles and pump bladders don't work well together, so we had another 3-hour inspection. So then what we did was, when we finally finished making the shoe, we had our final 3-hour inspection. And I was there right after Labor Day in 1898, kind of, 1989, and Freudian, right? So I watched about the first 3,000 pairs being made. And all of them worked, and everything worked, and we were hitting on all cylinders. In the meantime, we were still doing other projects, so I had other things to do. And I flew back home, and the rest of the 6,000 pairs were made, and I set up an incoming inspection at the the Reebok warehouse rather, and expecting when they arrived in late October, right before Thanksgiving, that we would, be kind of like a rubber stamp. Well, I get a call from my buddy Dave Pozzelli, who ran the warehouse, and he said, hey, we got these things, and they're not inflating. And I'm like, what? And he goes, they're not inflating. And I'm like, what do you mean they're not inflating? I'm like, you got a couple that fell off? He goes, no. He goes, we have like 2,000 pair that aren't inflating. I'm like, I watched these things. I'm like, what did they degrade in the air? I mean, it just didn't make any sense to me. So, as it turns out, what happened was, I go up to the warehouse, and I basically take these, and sure enough, they didn't inflate. So what I did was, I carefully de-stitched the top of the tongue to open up to see what was going on. And right at the top of this little black bulb, there's a little valve, a little floating diaphragm valve. All of those, in every single pair that I looked at, every single shoe that didn't work, it was crushed flat. And I'm like, what is going on? Well, there wasn't a lot of FaceTime back then, so a lot of phone calls, a lot of things. And so what happened was, the factory, people at the end of the line, the inspectors, got tired. So one inspector, after I left, had this genius idea of taking the needle out of a sewing machine and using a sewing machine foot to automatically pump the bladders. Well, it's great if you hit the middle of that ball. But if you hit the top part, the sewing machine doesn't know, so it just crushes the valve. And that is in fact, the last time that those shoes will ever inflate. So I got 2,000 pairs of these things out of 6,000. We're 3 weeks away, and so I begged Dave. I said, don't say a word, please. So, and then I went to my sample room folks, and I asked them, and because we had a little sample room sewers and stuff, and I cajoled them into working with me. So for the next almost 5 full days straight, I had one person de-stitching the top. I went to that factory in Massachusetts that making the pump bladders. I grabbed as many valves as I could, and I basically inserted the valves, and then we had some stitchers who were just miracle workers, and they re-stitched it together. We put them back in boxes, and no one ever knew this. And I honestly didn't tell this story for years because I thought retroactively they would fire me, So that's what happened. And the pump came out, and it came out like this, and it was a great shoe, and it was just an item. But what happened was Paul Fireman, who was the head of Reebok, he believed in it passionately, and he thought this was going to be the next freestyle of the 90s, which is basically Reebok's equivalent of, the next plateau. And it was going to set a standard in basketball. So what happened was he got the team together, and then they did this.
The key is the pump.
Be able to pump myself up. I don't know the mechanics of it. Push this in as many times as you want. Tights around your ankle.
Felt like a tailor-made fit.
When you want to release, it's a little button back here.
Press it and air releases.
I think somebody might sneak up behind me, push my release button, let all my air out.
Some people like BMWs. I like gym shoes.
Pump it up.
So that advertisement came out, and the pump started taking off. And through the energy of our athletes, some of who were there, but not all of them, it really became a thing. So we went from 6,000 pairs being purchased by Foot Locker as a favor to literally 500,000 pair through 1990. And it became like a thing. And this was $170 back then, which was way out of my price league, right? But I had an inside track. So, but they were being bought up because they worked and they were good. But more importantly, the team told the story. And I thought the pump was doing really, really well until one evening in February of 1991, this happened. And what happened was, this insanely talented rookie from the Boston Celtics, who, by the way, Boston Celtics players should not have ever been in a slam dunk competition. That's just how the Celtics were, right? But D shows up as a bit of an outlier, would you say? I've heard that people thought he was Sean Kemp's little brother. D came in, and not only with his insane, talented dunks that won the competition, he had this showmanship that personified the pump in a way that made it like a live object. And so for a long time, the pump became the D Brown shoe. And by the way, even though this young man won't say it, today they are relaunching the D Brown pump for, I think, the third or fourth time. So, yeah, absolutely. And then fast forward, because I only got a few seconds, but I want to get into this because it was about the team, it was about this energy and stuff. And I was at Reebok for a long time, did a lot of product, but then in 2014, I had an opportunity. Reebok was looking for some new gigs to kind of get involved with, partnerships, and I met this guy, Jason McCarthy, Emily Dent, and Mike Walther, and they have this company called GORUCK. And I actually did my first event with Emily, even though I didn't know it was Emily. I'm like, the Emily, so blah, blah, blah. Long story short. But what was interesting, and what is interesting, is that GORUCK has got this energy and this passion and this palpable entity that literally very few companies ever have. Reebok had it back in the early days. Reebok lost it because it got fat, drunk, and happy a little bit. Some people that Dee knows very well are working at getting it back. But GORUCK is a brand and a company that lives its statements. It lives by its word, and it's really cool. And the products are really a challenge. I left Reebok in 2015 for a number of reasons, GORUCK being one of them, actually the one. But ended up going to Vietnam and working on boots with Jason McCarthy and Richard Rice and Andy Nelson. And I'm working in the same factories with the same factory group, not the same factory, but the same factory group, and actually the same people I did the pump with. Because when I approached it with them, I said, hey, would you guys do this? And, GORUCK was not even a footwear company. And they typically don't, but they said, hey, we know you, come on. But what sold it was Jason and Richard and the story and the energy and the authenticity of what was being done. And so we did that. We had some fun. It was very cool. And I guess I want to thank you guys all for being here at Sandlot JAX and the Fitness Festival. But I also want to let you know that you guys are on the inside track of a remarkable company. GORUCK is phenomenal. And I appreciate being here, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.